She thought she could boss him around, but she had no idea this veteran wasn't alone, and that what came next would leave the entire neighborhood speechless. The neighborhood was quiet that Saturday morning, the kind of quiet that usually meant peace and tranquility. Lawns were neatly trimmed, fences freshly painted, and the hum of sprinklers filled the air. But for one veteran, the calmness of the suburb was about to be shattered. John, a decorated U.S. Army veteran, was outside his home, kneeling by his mailbox and tightening a loose hinge. He wore his favorite camouflage jacket, a symbol of the years he had spent serving his country. The jacket wasn't just clothing, it was a badge of honor, a reminder of the sacrifices he had made and the brothers he had served alongside. To John, it was as natural as breathing. From across the street, a sharp, commanding voice cut through the morning air. "Excuse me." John looked up and froze mid-screw. Standing at the edge of the sidewalk was none other than Karen Thompson, the notorious HOA enforcer, clipboard in hand and an expression that could curdle milk. She had a reputation in the community, meticulous, judgmental, and relentless when it came to enforcing the rules, no matter how petty they seemed. "You," she said, pointing at him. "You can't wear that camouflage. It's inappropriate, and it violates HOA guidelines. Remove it immediately, or I will be forced to take action." John slowly stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. He met her gaze calmly, the kind of calm that only comes from experience and years of handling high-pressure situations. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady, "this isn't a uniform. This is a jacket I earned. I'm not doing anything wrong, and I have every right to wear it on my own property." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her face reddening with fury. "Rules are rules. You can't just ignore them because you feel entitled. This neighborhood has standards, and I enforce them. Do you understand me?" "Yes, I understand," John replied. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. But respect is just as important as rules. I've served this country, and this jacket represents that service. I won't take it off just because someone thinks they can bully me into it." Karen took a step closer, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. "Bully? I'm not bullying. I'm maintaining order. You think you're above everyone else? Well, think again." A few neighbors had begun to peek from behind curtains or through their front windows, curious about the escalating confrontation. Some whispered to each other, clearly amused by Karen's theatrics. Others looked uneasy, unsure how to respond. John's calm presence only seemed to make Karen angrier. Her face flushed deeper. "You will comply. If not, I'll—" "Excuse me, Karen," John interrupted, holding up a hand. "Before you make threats, let me make something clear. I respect rules when they're reasonable. I obey laws when they're just. But this is neither. You have no authority to make me remove my jacket on my own property." Karen's eyes narrowed. She opened her mouth to argue but paused, clearly shocked by his unwavering confidence. She wasn't used to resistance, especially not from someone she thought she could intimidate. "You think this is funny?" she snapped. "I'm not laughing," John said calmly. "I'm simply standing my ground." For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the distant hum of passing cars and the faint chirping of birds. The tension was palpable. Karen's fists clenched, her grip on the clipboard tightening as if she might use it as a weapon. John stood tall, exuding a quiet strength that came from years of training, of facing danger and surviving. "Listen, you," Karen began, but John cut her off with a slight shake of his head. "I suggest you reconsider your approach. Threats and anger don't win arguments. Respect does. And right now, you're choosing neither." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She was clearly flustered, unsure how to proceed. Around them, the neighborhood held its collective breath. This wasn't just another HOA spat. There was something about John, something commanding, something unshakable. Karen's voice finally wavered. You'll regret this." John didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled faintly, a small gesture of quiet confidence. Maybe. Or maybe you'll learn that respect matters more than rules when the rules are enforced without understanding. As Karen stormed off down the street, muttering under her breath, John returned to his mailbox, tightening the hinge with deliberate calm. But in the back of his mind, he knew this confrontation was far from over. And he had a feeling that if Karen thought she could intimidate him alone, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. The morning air still carried the remnants of the confrontation, but the quiet of the neighborhood had grown heavier, tense, like the calm before a storm. Karen Thompson stormed back to her little white SUV, muttering under her breath about how some people have no respect for authority. But even as she grumbled, the sense that this was far from over lingered. John, the veteran, stood on his front lawn, adjusting the hinge of his mailbox with deliberate calm. His camouflage jacket still draped over his shoulders, a silent statement that he wasn't backing down. A few neighbors peeked through blinds or doorways, whispering quietly to one another. Some were shaking their heads at Karen's audacity, while others stared in awe at John's composure. "Look, I don't want trouble," John said quietly, almost to himself, though enough for the nearby spectators to hear. "I just want to be left alone on my own property." Karen, refusing to give up, returned with a clipboard full of HOA paperwork. She slammed it onto her SUV roof and straightened her posture, trying to reclaim authority. "Trouble? This isn't trouble. This is enforcement. You are breaking the rules, and I will escalate this. Fines, legal action, maybe even calling the police. You will comply, John?" John didn't flinch. He met her glare with the steady, calm gaze of someone who had faced real threats in real war zones. "I understand the rules," he said evenly, "but rules don't replace common sense or respect. I'm not breaking any law. You have no authority here beyond the paperwork. And I will not remove my jacket." Karen's face twisted in frustration. She waved the clipboard like a weapon. "Do you think you're above the HOA, above the community?" she shouted. "You think your military service excuses you from following rules?" A few neighbors were now fully outside, some recording on phones, curious about how far this confrontation would go. There was a strange mix of tension and excitement in the air, the kind that comes when everyone senses a showdown is inevitable. John remained calm. He raised a hand to placate the escalating crowd. "It's not about excuses. It's about standing up for what's right. I respect rules that are fair, but I will not be intimidated into removing something that represents my service. That's not disrespecting the community, it's respecting it in a much deeper way." Karen's eyes narrowed, lips pressed into a thin, angry line. She wasn't used to anyone speaking to her with such unwavering confidence. "You will regret this," she barked, taking another step closer. John didn't respond. Instead, he subtly glanced over his shoulder, scanning the quiet street, almost like he was expecting something, or someone. His posture was casual, but there was an unmistakable tension in his muscles, a readiness that told any observer this was far from an ordinary neighborhood spat. Karen, oblivious to the subtle cue, continued her verbal assault. "I have the right to enforce these rules. You think your service gives you a free pass? This neighborhood will not tolerate disobedience." Just then, a low, distant rumble of engines echoed from down the street. Karen froze mid-sentence, but she tried to mask her confusion with a dismissive wave. "What now? Are you going to call in the cavalry?" she sneered. But the rumble grew louder. It wasn't just one car, it was multiple vehicles approaching with precision and purpose. Shadows fell across the road, and the people who had been watching felt the energy shift in an instant. John's eyes remained calm, but there was a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Karen's confidence faltered. Something was coming, and she had no idea what, or who, was approaching. The scene froze in that moment of tension, Karen, furious and confused, still wielding her clipboard, John, calm and composed, waiting, and the distant sound of engines growing louder, hinting at a revelation that would change everything. The neighborhood watchers exchanged glances, sensing the calm before a storm. Little did Karen know, her petty enforcement was about to collide with a force she had never anticipated, one that would leave her completely powerless. And in the back of her mind, a whisper of fear began to form. Maybe I misjudged him. The street was alive with an almost electric tension. Neighbors had begun to gather outside their homes, whispers spreading like wildfire as everyone tried to process the confrontation between Karen and the veteran. Some were filming on their phones, others leaned on fences or peeked from windows, unsure whether they were witnessing just another HOA argument or something far bigger. Karen Thompson, red-faced and fuming, adjusted her clipboard as if its weight could give her the authority she desperately wanted to assert. "This is outrageous," she shouted. "You think your military service makes you untouchable? You will comply, or face the consequences." John, the veteran, stood on his driveway, calm and collected. His posture radiated confidence, the kind born from years of high-pressure missions and life-or-death scenarios. "Karen," he said evenly, "I've already told you, I will not remove my jacket. It's not disrespectful to the community, it's a symbol of my service. I follow the law, not petty intimidation." Karen's eyes narrowed. She had encountered stubborn people before, but there was something different about John. Something she couldn't put her finger on, and it unsettled her more than she cared to admit. "You are defying the HOA," she snapped, gesturing wildly at the perfectly manicured lawns around them. "Do you even understand the power I have here?" John let out a soft chuckle, not mocking, but confident. "Power doesn't come from intimidation, Karen. True authority comes from respect, and right now, that's the one thing you're lacking." The words hit Karen like a cold gust of wind. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She didn't like it when someone talked back, and she certainly didn't like it when someone spoke with such calm certainty in front of an audience. A hush fell over the small crowd of neighbors. Everyone could sense the shift in energy, a tension that was no longer about HOA rules. It had become something bigger, something primal. The confrontation was no longer about a jacket, it was about courage, respect, and who really held power in the street that morning. Karen took a deep breath, trying to regain control. "If you don't comply, I will escalate this, legal action, fines, maybe even the police," she shouted, her voice cracking slightly. John tilted his head, calm as ever. "Go ahead. Do your worst. I've faced far greater threats than a clipboard or an HOA notice. And if this escalates, I'll handle it as calmly as I always do." Karen's hands shook slightly as she gripped the clipboard tighter. For the first time, doubt flickered in her eyes. She wasn't used to this, people challenging her, standing firm, not cowering under her threats. It unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Then, the distant rumble returned, engines rolling closer, steady and deliberate. The sound wasn't chaotic or random, it was disciplined, measured, almost tactical. Karen froze mid-step, her heartbeat quickening. What is that?" she muttered under her breath, trying to maintain her composure. John didn't flinch. Instead, he subtly glanced toward the street, a faint smile on his lips. The calm in his demeanor contrasted sharply with Karen's growing panic. She still didn't know what was coming, but she would soon. As the engines grew louder, the crowd of neighbors instinctively stepped back, murmuring anxiously. A sense of anticipation rippled through the air. The tension was palpable. Everyone knew something was about to happen, though none of them could predict the scale or intensity of what was approaching. Karen's confident facade began to crack. She looked around, realizing that the neighborhood was watching, that her authority was teetering on the edge of collapse. Her face paled slightly, and for the first time, a flicker of fear crossed her eyes. John's calm gaze remained fixed forward, and a subtle shift in his posture hinted that the moment of revelation was near. This confrontation, which had started as a petty HOA dispute, was about to escalate into something far beyond Karen's understanding. The street fell silent again, the tension hanging thick in the air. Karen, still clutching her clipboard, didn't notice the figures emerging from the shadows, the ones who were about to redefine the meaning of power, respect, and consequences on that quiet suburban morning. And for the first time, Karen realized she had no idea who she was really dealing with. The distant rumble that had been growing louder all morning finally revealed its source. Down the street, a convoy of sleek, black vehicles rolled into view, engines low and commanding. The sound alone made the hair on Karen Thompson's arms stand on end. She gripped her clipboard tighter, a bead of sweat forming on her forehead. John, standing calmly on his driveway, didn't flinch. Instead, he straightened his shoulders, a subtle smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The timing was perfect. The neighborhood watchers had grown silent, sensing the shift in energy, the kind of tension that makes people hold their breath. As the vehicles came closer, Karen finally got a clear view. Men and women in tactical gear emerged, moving with precision and confidence. Each step was deliberate, every movement purposeful. They weren't just ordinary people, they were elite, highly trained, and experienced in situations most civilians couldn't even imagine. Karen's eyes widened. "What? Who?" she stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. John turned slightly toward her, his calm demeanor unwavering. "Karen, meet my brothers," he said simply. His voice was quiet but carried an undeniable authority. "Special Forces. All of us." The words hit Karen like a thunderclap. Her face drained of color. She had thought she was in control, that her clipboard and petty rules were enough to intimidate anyone in this quiet neighborhood. But standing before her now was a force she could neither argue with nor threaten. The Special Forces team fanned out across the street, not aggressively, but with an unmistakable presence. Their eyes scanned the surroundings, calm and professional, assessing every detail, ready to intervene if necessary. Yet there was no hostility in their posture, only quiet authority. Neighbors gasped and whispered to one another. Phones came out to capture the moment. The once tense, almost comical confrontation between Karen and John had escalated into something extraordinary. Karen swallowed hard. She could feel the power dynamic shifting with every step the team took toward the driveway. I think there's been a mistake," she murmured, clutching her clipboard as if it were a shield. John shook his head slightly, still smiling faintly. "No mistake. You just misjudged the situation. I'm on my property, and I will not be intimidated. But now, you'll understand why I stand as I do." The team didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. Their presence alone communicated experience, discipline, and authority. It was clear to anyone watching that this was not a threat that could be bargained with. Karen's eyes darted around, suddenly aware that she was outnumbered and outmatched. One of the Special Forces members stepped forward, a silent gesture that emphasized calm control. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady and firm, "the situation here is being handled. Please step back and allow this gentleman to maintain his rights on his own property." Karen blinked, trying to form a rebuttal, but the words stuck in her throat. The clipboard she had wielded like a weapon now felt absurdly powerless in her hands. She realized, with mounting horror, that her little HOA edict held no weight here. Not against trained soldiers. Not against someone who had dedicated his life to serving his country and standing firm. The neighborhood seemed to collectively exhale. Even those who had been skeptical of John now watched in awe as the veterans quietly, calmly, and firmly asserted the balance of respect and authority. This was not about confrontation anymore, it was about justice, presence, and the undeniable weight of experience. Karen took a step back, finally muttering, I didn't know." Her voice was almost inaudible, but it carried everything she felt, fear, disbelief, and the dawning realization that she had underestimated the man in front of her. John nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "Now you understand," he said softly. "Respect isn't given by rules alone. It's earned, and sometimes, it's enforced by those who've walked the path you can't even imagine." The Special Forces team stood as silent sentinels, their presence alone enough to ensure the neighborhood, and Karen, would never forget this moment. And for the first time, Karen realized the truth, she was not dealing with a simple homeowner, nor was she dealing with someone she could intimidate. She was dealing with a veteran, backed by elite soldiers, and there was no disputing who held authority on this quiet suburban street. Karen Thompson stood frozen on the street, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline, her eyes darting from John to the imposing figures flanking him. The neighborhood, once a quiet suburban scene, now felt like the epicenter of a storm. The murmurs of onlookers faded into a tense hush as everyone realized the confrontation had reached an entirely new level. John remained calm, shoulders squared, chest out, a symbol of unwavering confidence. His Special Forces brothers moved with precision and discipline, but there was no aggression in their stance, only authority. Every step, every subtle gesture communicated, "Do not underestimate this man or his team." Karen finally found her voice, though it trembled with both anger and fear. I have the right to enforce HOA rules. This is my neighborhood. You." Before she could finish, one of the Special Forces members stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. His voice was calm but firm, carrying a weight that brooked no argument. "Ma'am, your authority does not extend to violating someone's rights on their own property. The situation here is under control. Please step back." Karen's face drained of color. Her lips quivered as she stammered, "But, this is absurd. You can't just." John lifted a hand, signaling for calm. "Karen, this isn't about punishment or humiliation. It's about understanding boundaries and respect. You overstepped. That's all. This ends peacefully, but you need to recognize the limits of your authority." Karen opened her mouth, searching desperately for a retort, but the sight of multiple trained Special Forces veterans standing calmly yet firmly around John left her speechless. Her usual arsenal of threats, fines, and intimidation tactics had no effect here. A neighbor whispered to another, barely audible, "Wow, she really picked the wrong person." Another added, "I didn't know he had backup like this." Phones were raised, capturing every moment, as Karen's facade of control crumbled before the quiet authority of John and his team. The veteran's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Karen's flustered state. John's words were measured but firm. "Authority isn't about fear. It's about respect. You tried to intimidate me, but I stand here, not because I'm defying rules, but because I know my rights, and because I know when to call in backup." Karen's hands shook slightly as she dropped her clipboard, the weight of the confrontation finally hitting her. She realized the mistake she had made. She had assumed she could bully someone who appeared vulnerable, never imagining he had a support system far beyond the HOA's reach. One of John's Special Forces brothers stepped slightly closer, not threatening, but ensuring Karen understood the situation. "The rules you enforce are meaningless when applied without understanding or respect. You are done here. Step back." Karen swallowed hard. Her face turned pale, and her voice dropped to a barely audible whisper, I didn't realize." John nodded once, satisfied. "Now you do. This isn't personal. It's about understanding limits." The Special Forces team subtly shifted, their presence a silent warning and reassurance at the same time. They didn't raise their voices, they didn't shout, but the message was clear: respect the veteran, respect the law, and never underestimate the person standing before you. Karen backed away slowly, her mind racing. She knew she had been defeated, not by aggression, but by composure, authority, and a team whose experience far outweighed her petty rules. Her once dominant aura of control was gone, replaced by embarrassment and the realization that she had overstepped her bounds. John turned back to his mailbox, resuming his work as if nothing had happened. The jacket on his shoulders remained, a symbol not just of his service, but of his resilience, patience, and the unwavering principle that respect must be earned, not demanded. Neighbors watched, silent but visibly impressed. The confrontation had escalated far beyond anything they expected, and the lesson was clear: intimidation and petty authority cannot overcome integrity, courage, and experience. Karen finally retreated to her SUV, muttering under her breath. For the first time, she understood that her little HOA rules meant nothing against someone who knew their rights, their value, and had the backing to enforce both. John glanced at his Special Forces brothers, a quiet nod of acknowledgement passing between them. The confrontation was over, the lesson delivered, and the neighborhood would remember this morning for years to come. And as Karen drove away, humiliated and defeated, one truth remained undeniable: respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. The morning sun glinted off the neatly trimmed lawns, but the suburban calm had been shattered. Karen Thompson stood at the edge of the driveway, clutching what remained of her authority like a fragile shield. Her clipboard, once a symbol of control, lay abandoned on the sidewalk, a silent testament to her defeat. John, the veteran, continued adjusting his mailbox hinge, his movements calm and deliberate. The camouflage jacket still rested on his shoulders, a quiet emblem of service, courage, and unwavering resolve. Beside him, his Special Forces brothers stood like silent sentinels, imposing, disciplined, yet entirely composed. The tension that had gripped the neighborhood just moments ago had dissipated, replaced with a powerful sense of justice and order. Karen's face flushed with frustration and embarrassment. For the first time, she felt powerless in front of someone she had tried to intimidate. The words she had practiced, the threats she had made, the sense of superiority she had carried, gone. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, but no words could escape. A few neighbors stepped out from behind their fences and doors, whispering among themselves, some recording the scene. They had witnessed the collapse of Karen's authority, and there was an almost audible sigh of relief sweeping through the block. Even those who had supported her in previous HOA disputes looked on with a mix of shock and admiration for John's composure. John finally spoke, his voice calm and measured, carrying just enough authority to command attention without raising tension. "Karen," he said quietly, yet firmly, "you overstepped. I did not need to raise my voice or act aggressively. I simply stood my ground and called on the right people to ensure respect was maintained. This ends now, peacefully." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her face still pale. I didn't know," she murmured, the weight of the situation settling in. Her sense of control, so carefully curated over years of HOA rule enforcement, had crumbled in minutes. One of John's Special Forces brothers stepped slightly forward, not to intimidate, but to reinforce the lesson. "Ma'am," he said, calm and authoritative, "your role here does not extend to bullying or threatening residents. The situation has been resolved. Please step back and respect their rights." Karen swallowed hard. Her trembling hands betrayed her as she slowly backed away from the driveway. Her usual aggressive posture had vanished, replaced by an unsteady, almost apologetic demeanor. The neighborhood had seen a transformation, one that left her humbled, if not entirely defeated. John nodded once to his team, a subtle acknowledgement of their support and professionalism. Then he turned back to his mailbox, resuming his task as though the entire confrontation had been nothing more than a minor interruption. The camouflage jacket on his shoulders remained, a quiet statement of resilience and honor. Neighbors began to murmur among themselves, praising John's calm approach and the impeccable discipline of his Special Forces brothers. Some whispered that they had never seen anything like it, a confrontation that could have turned chaotic, resolved instead through composure, authority, and silent strength. Karen finally retreated to her SUV, muttering under her breath, her mind racing with disbelief. The clipboard she had wielded so confidently had failed her, the threats she had issued carried no weight, and the power she had assumed was hers by default had evaporated. She had learned, perhaps painfully, that bullying and intimidation are powerless against someone who knows their rights, stands firm, and commands respect. John looked at the retreating figure of Karen, a quiet sense of satisfaction settling over him. He knew the lesson had been delivered, not with anger, not with confrontation, but through calm resolve, backed by experience and unwavering principle. The neighborhood would remember this, not as a petty HOA dispute, but as a story of courage, respect, and integrity. As the last of Karen's retreating footsteps faded, John turned to his Special Forces brothers. A small nod of acknowledgement passed between them, a silent signal of camaraderie, understanding, and shared pride. The morning had been tense, yes, but it had ended with the right outcome: respect upheld, authority balanced, and peace restored. And as John adjusted the mailbox one final time, the neighborhood returned to its quiet, sunlit routine. Only this time, there was a new awareness among the residents, standing up for what is right, backed by calm determination and the right support, can overcome even the most overbearing opposition. For Karen Thompson, the lesson was undeniable: never underestimate someone who has served, trained, and knows the value of respect, and never assume authority is absolute when it's built on fear. The neighborhood had returned to its quiet, suburban rhythm, but the morning's events had left an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed them. Lawns were still neatly trimmed, the sunlight reflected off freshly painted fences, and the hum of sprinklers filled the air, but something had changed. The quiet had a new weight, a sense of respect for courage, discipline, and integrity that couldn't be ignored. John stood on his driveway, adjusting his mailbox one final time. His camouflage jacket, the symbol of his military service and unwavering resolve, still rested proudly on his shoulders. Around him, his Special Forces brothers lingered, subtle and watchful, their presence both reassuring and commanding. Their disciplined postures contrasted sharply with the defeated figure of Karen Thompson, who had retreated down the street, humiliated and subdued. Neighbors emerged from behind fences and windows, this time without hesitation. Some approached John cautiously, others with admiration in their eyes. Whispers spread quickly. "I didn't know he had backup, or that he'd handle it like that," said one. "That was incredible," said another. Everyone agreed on one thing: the veteran had handled the confrontation with unmatched composure and authority. John turned to face the neighborhood, taking a moment to speak. His voice was calm, deliberate, and carried a quiet authority that demanded attention without raising tension. "This morning wasn't about rules or who could enforce them," he said. "It was about respect, respect for one another, for our community, and for those who have served. Authority is only meaningful when paired with understanding and fairness. Intimidation may win moments, but it never wins respect." His Special Forces brothers nodded slightly, silent but supportive. Their presence had been subtle, yet undeniable, an unspoken reminder that courage is often backed by unity and experience. The neighborhood absorbed the lesson without needing it spelled out. Everyone had seen what happens when confidence, training, and calm resolve intersect with overconfidence and petty authority. Karen Thompson, meanwhile, had parked her SUV a few houses away, still muttering under her breath. The realization that her tactics had failed, and failed spectacularly, was beginning to sink in. For the first time, she understood that her sense of control in the neighborhood was fragile, conditional, and dependent on respect, not fear. She had misjudged John completely, and the consequences had been both immediate and humiliating. As the neighborhood slowly resumed their day, life seemed almost normal, but there was an undercurrent of quiet admiration and reflection. The story of what had happened spread quickly, first through whispered conversations, then through videos on social media. The lesson was clear: standing firm, knowing your rights, and calling on the right support when needed can turn even the most tense situations into victories of principle and integrity. John looked at his Special Forces brothers, a small, approving nod passing between them. Their silent understanding conveyed pride, respect, and the reassurance that they had handled the situation exactly as needed. No violence had occurred, no chaos had erupted, yet the lesson had been delivered loud and clear. As he straightened his jacket and took a final glance at his mailbox, John reflected on the morning's events. It wasn't just about Karen, the clipboard, or the petty HOA rules. It was about the importance of standing up for what is right, maintaining composure under pressure, and understanding the balance between authority and respect. Lessons like these, he knew, were far more enduring than any fleeting neighborhood dispute. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the quiet streets. Children played, sprinklers continued their rhythmic hum, and neighbors began returning to their routines, but now with a new perspective. Courage and respect had been demonstrated, and the memory of the morning would linger, shaping the community in subtle but lasting ways. For John, the veteran, it was a reminder of what he had always known: discipline, honor, and the right support can overcome even the most overbearing opposition. For Karen, the lesson was equally clear, though perhaps harder to swallow: respect cannot be demanded through intimidation, it must be earned. And as the neighborhood settled back into its rhythm, one truth remained indisputable: when integrity, courage, and experience collide with arrogance and control, the outcome is clear and unforgettable.